Las Vegas, 1959. The Grand Riviera Hotel stood like a monument to American excess, its facade glittering against the desert night. From the street, you could hear music spilling out through heavy doors, big band jazz, laughter, the clink of champagne glasses. Inside the main ballroom, crystal chandeliers hung from gilded ceilings like frozen waterfalls, each one worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. The light they cast was warm, flattering, designed to make everyone look like they belonged in a place this expensive. But beneath the glamour, beneath the music and the laughter, there was something else, something darker. This wasn't just a party. This was a gathering of wolves in tailored suits, smiling at each other with sharp teeth, each one calculating who owed what to whom, who had power, who was losing it. Hollywood stars mingled with casino owners. Politicians shook hands with men whose businesses existed only in whispers. Everyone was connected to everyone else through invisible threads of money, favors, secrets, and fear. The orchestra had been playing Sinatra. Now they'd shifted to something lighter, instrumental, background music for people who weren't really listening. The real entertainment wasn't on the stage. It was in the conversations happening at tables tucked into corners, in the deals being made over cigars and cognac, in the careful dance of respect and intimidation that kept Las Vegas running. Near the center of the room, surrounded by people who pretended not to notice her, stood a woman in a deep blue evening gown. The fabric shimmered when she moved, catching light like water. She was beautiful in a way that made photographers swarm. But tonight, she moved carefully, one hand resting near her rounded stomach. Pregnant, visibly, unmistakably pregnant. Her name didn't matter to most people in that room. What mattered was whose wife she was. Dean Martin's wife. And Dean Martin was standing only a few feet away, holding a drink he hadn't touched in 20 minutes, laughing at something someone had said. He looked relaxed, comfortable, like a man who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. The tuxedo fit him perfectly, black, classic, expensive without being showy. His hair was perfect. His smile was easy. To everyone watching, he was exactly what they expected. The singer, the actor, the charmer, the man who made everything look effortless. That was a performance. The truth was something else entirely. The man behind the smile. Dean Martin had built his life on contradictions. To the public, he was the laid-back crooner who barely rehearsed, who showed up to recordings with a drink in hand and walked away with a hit song. The man who made it all look easy. But people who knew him really knew him, understood that the easiness was the hardest part. It took work to make people think you weren't working. It took discipline to appear undisciplined. He'd grown up Dino Crocetti in Steubenville, Ohio, the son of Italian immigrants. His father had been a barber. Dean had worked as a bootlegger, a car dealer, a boxer. He'd broken his nose twice before he turned 20. He learned early that the world didn't give you anything, that you took what you needed or you went without. That strength wasn't about how hard you could hit. It was about how much you could take and keep standing. By 1959, Dean Martin was a star. Movies, records, television. He was friends with Frank Sinatra, part of the Rat Pack, beloved by millions. But he never forgot where he came from. Never forgot the feel of a punch landing wrong, the sound of bones breaking, the way a man's eyes changed when he realized he'd lost. His marriage was his anchor. His wife was the one person who knew him before the fame, before the name change, before Dean Martin existed. She'd seen Dino Crocetti, the kid from Ohio with broken knuckles and big dreams. She believed in him when no one else did. And now she was carrying his child, their child, a life that hadn't been born yet, but already meant everything. Dean protected two things in this world, his family and his dignity. And anyone who threatened either one learned very quickly that the smile, the charm, the easygoing persona, that was all just camouflage. Underneath was something colder, harder, more dangerous than most people wanted to believe. Vegas understood this, even if Hollywood didn't. Vegas knew that Dean Martin had connections, that he did favors for people who did favors for other people, that when things needed to be handled quietly, Dean knew who to call. He wasn't a mobster. He was something stranger, more useful. He existed in the space between worlds. Hollywood star, Vegas insider, a man who could shake hands with senators and sit down to cards with men who made people disappear. That duality kept him safe. Usually, the ballroom, the party had been going for 3 hours when things started to shift. The early crowd had thinned out. The politicians and their wives, the older casino owners, the people who had to maintain appearances. What remained was the core, the people who didn't have to pretend. The music got louder. The drinks got stronger. Inhibitions dissolved like sugar in bourbon. Dean's wife had been standing near the edge of the dance floor, talking to another woman. Someone's wife, someone's mistress. It didn't matter. They were making polite conversation the way women did at these things, discussing nothing of consequence while their husbands and boyfriends made deals that would change lives. She looked tired. Pregnancy did that, especially in the 3rd trimester. Her feet hurt. Her back ached. The dress, beautiful as it was, felt too tight around her ribs. She wanted to sit down, but all the nearby tables were occupied, and she didn't want to make a scene by asking someone to move. So she stood, smiling, nodding, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. Dean glanced at her every few minutes, checking in without being obvious about it. He'd offered to leave early, twice, but she'd insisted they stay. This was important. This party wasn't just a party. It was politics. It was relationships. It was the invisible architecture that held their world together. Leaving early sent a message, so they stayed. That's when the mobster arrived. He was late, fashionably arrogantly late. The kind of late that said, "I don't need to be here on time, because you'll wait for me." He came to the main doors with an entourage. For men, all of them thick-necked and dead-eyed, the kind of men who got paid to hurt people and enjoyed their work. The mobster himself was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered and heavy-set, wearing a pinstripe suit that had cost a fortune, but still looked slightly wrong on him, like putting a tuxedo on a bear. His face was flushed from alcohol. He'd been drinking before he arrived, and he continued drinking after. His eyes moved across the room, cataloging faces, deciding who mattered and who didn't. His name was Anthony Corso. People called him Tony the Bull, not to his face, never to his face, but behind his back in whispers, because the nickname fit. He was brutal, relentless, incapable of subtlety. He'd made his fortune in construction, extortion, and loan sharking. He'd broken strikes by breaking bones. He'd made examples of people who crossed him, and he'd never, not once in his entire life, been told no by anyone who lived to repeat it. Tony Corso had come to Vegas to expand, to take over territories, buy into casinos, establish himself as a power broker. He had the money. He had the muscle. What he didn't have was respect. Not the kind that mattered. Not the kind that made people step aside willingly instead of out of fear. He was trying to buy it. Tonight, surrounded by Hollywood stars and casino owners, he thought he was succeeding. The approach. Tony moved through the ballroom like he owned it, slapping backs, shaking hands, making jokes that people laughed at because they were afraid not to. His crew followed 2 steps behind, silent, watchful, ready. He'd been drinking steadily for hours. Not sloppy drunk, not yet, but drunk enough that his judgment was impaired, his inhibitions lowered, his sense of consequence dulled. Drunk enough to be dangerous. He saw Dean Martin's wife standing alone. The other woman had excused herself to the restroom, and something in Tony's alcohol-soaked brain decided this was an opportunity, a chance to make an impression, to show everyone in the room that he could approach anyone, talk to anyone, because he was Tony Corso and nobody told him what to do. He walked up to her too fast, stopping too close, invading her space in a way that was immediately, viscerally wrong. She took a small step back, instinctive, protective. Her hand moved to her stomach. "Mrs. Martin," Tony said, his voice too loud. People at nearby tables glanced over, then looked away. Nobody wanted to be involved in whatever was about to happen. She smiled politely, the smile women learn early, the smile that says, "Please leave me alone," without saying the words. "Mr. Corso." "You look beautiful tonight," Tony said, and the way he said it made it sound like an accusation instead of a compliment. "How far along are you?" 7 months. 7 months, Tony repeated, his eyes dropping to her stomach in a way that made her skin crawl. Must be hard, standing around at these boring parties. You should sit down. Want me to get you a chair? I'm fine, thank you. You sure? You look tired. I said I'm fine. Her voice had an edge now, polite but firm. The kind of firmness that should have been a warning. Tony didn't hear it. Or, if he did, he didn't care. I'm just trying to be nice, he said, spreading his hands. No need to be rude. I'm not being rude. I'm just... You know who I am? Tony interrupted, his voice dropping lower, harder. You know what I do? She didn't answer. Her eyes searched the room, looking for Dean. He was still across the ballroom, his back turned, deep in conversation with someone. Too far away, too distracted. Tony leaned in closer. I could buy this whole hotel if I wanted to. I could buy your husband if I wanted to. So when I offer to get you a chair, you should say thank you. Please step back, she said quietly. Or what? The question hung in the air between them. She didn't have an answer. She was pregnant, vulnerable, surrounded by people who wouldn't help her. Tony knew it. She knew it. And he smiled, not a friendly smile, a predator's smile, because he thought he'd won. That's when he raised his hand. The shove. It happened fast. Tony Corso, drunk on power and alcohol and his own inflated sense of importance, reached out and shoved Dean Martin's pregnant wife. Not a tap, not a gesture. A hard, deliberate push to her upper chest and shoulder. Her balance broke instantly. The weight of the pregnancy made her center of gravity all wrong. Her body tilted backward, one foot sliding across the polished floor. Her free hand flew up, grabbing at air, finding nothing. The other hand pressed against her stomach, protective, terrified. For one terrible moment, it looked like she was going to fall. A woman at a nearby table gasped, a sharp, involuntary sound that cut through the music like a scream. A man froze mid-conversation, his champagne glass halfway to his lips. The orchestra kept playing, oblivious, but the people around them weren't. They saw, they understood. Dean Martin's wife stumbled backward 3 steps before catching herself against the edge of a table. The impact rattled silverware, knocked over a water glass. She stood there, breathing hard, one hand on the table for support, the other still pressed to her stomach, her eyes wide with shock and fear. Tony Corso laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an apologetic laugh. A cruel, dismissive laugh that said, "Look what I can do and nobody stops me." His crew laughed with him, right on cue. The room went silent in the way only rooms full of powerful people ever go silent. Quiet, tense. Everyone suddenly very interested in their drinks, their conversations. Anything except what had just happened. Because getting involved meant picking a side. And picking a side meant making an enemy. And in Las Vegas in 1959, making the wrong enemy could end your career. Or your life. Dean Martin saw everything. He'd turned at the sound of the gas, his conversation forgotten. He saw his wife stumbling. He saw her hand on her stomach. He saw the fear in her eyes. He saw Tony Corso laughing. And something in Dean Martin's expression changed. The smile disappeared. The easy charm. The relaxed posture. The carefully constructed persona of the laid-back crooner. All of it vanished like smoke. What remained was something colder. Older. The part of him that remembered being Dino Crocetti. The kid from Steubenville who'd learned to fight in back alleys and warehouses, who understood that some things couldn't be talked away. He crossed the ballroom floor with long, measured steps, not running, not rushing, just walking with purpose, with certainty, like a man who knew exactly what he was going to do and didn't need to hurry, because nobody was going to stop him. People moved out of his way without being asked. Dean reached his wife and put his arm around her shoulders, steadying her, his touch gentle despite the fury radiating off him like heat. He whispered something in her ear, too quiet for anyone else to hear, and she nodded, still shaking. Then Dean turned to face Tony Corso. The confrontation. "Did you just push my wife?" Dean's voice was quiet, calm, almost conversational. But there was something underneath it, something dangerous that made the people closest to them take a step back. Tony grinned, still riding the high of his own arrogance. She was being rude. I was just... Did you? Dean interrupted, each word precise. Just push my pregnant wife? The grin faltered. Tony looked around, expecting support from his crew, from the crowd, from someone. But the room had gone silent. Even his own men looked uncomfortable. Look, Dean, I didn't mean... Answer the question. Tony's face flushed darker. He wasn't used to being challenged. Especially not in public. Especially not by a singer. Yeah, I pushed her. So what? She was... Dean didn't let him finish. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the silent ballroom. You made a mistake tonight, Tony. A big one. But I'm going to give you a chance to apologize to my wife. Right now, in front of everyone. Tony laughed, a forced, nervous sound. You're kidding, right? You want me to apologize? Do you know who I am? I know exactly who you are, Dean said. You're Anthony Corso. You run loan operations in Chicago. You've got connections in 3 states. You've hurt people, killed people. I know all of that. He paused. But right now, in this moment, you're just a man who put his hands on my pregnant wife. And that's the only thing that matters. Tony's crew shifted, hands moving in side jackets. Dean didn't even glance at them. His eyes stayed locked on Tony. So here's what's gonna happen, Dean continued, his voice still that terrible calm. You're going to apologize to my wife. You're going to leave this hotel. And you're going to pray that I decide this is over. Tony's face darkened with rage. You threatening me, Dean? You? A fucking singer. I'm explaining consequences, Dean said. You cross a line. Now you pay. The only question is how much. You don't know what you're starting, Tony hissed. Dean smiled then, but it wasn't a smile from his movies, from his album covers. It was something else. Something that made Tony Corso, despite himself, despite his reputation, and his crew and his connections, take a small step backward. Yes, I do, Dean said quietly. He turned to his wife, helped her to her feet, and guided her toward the exit. No apology, no scene, no drama, just 2 people leaving a party. The orchestra, sensing the moment had passed, started playing again. People exhaled. Conversations resumed. Tony Corso stood in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by his crew, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. The aftermath. Dean took his wife home, made sure she was safe, comfortable, that the baby was okay. He called a doctor, someone he trusted, who came to the house and confirmed that everything was fine. No injuries, no complications, just fear, just humiliation, just the knowledge that she'd been pushed, manhandled, treated like property while hundreds of people watched and did nothing. Dean sat with her until she fell asleep. Then he sat in the dark living room, still wearing his tuxedo, staring at nothing. He'd made a decision in that ballroom. The moment Tony Corso pushed his wife, the moment he saw the fear in her eyes, Dean had made a choice. Not an angry choice, not an impulsive choice. A cold, calculated, irreversible choice. Tony Corso had to pay, not with money, not with an apology, with consequences that would ensure he never, ever touched another man's wife. Consequences that would send a message to every other arrogant mobster in Vegas. Dean Martin's family was off limits. Around 2 a.m, Dean made a phone call. 3 minutes, no names, careful phrasing. When he hung up, arrangements had been made. The reckoning. 3 days later, Tony Corso received an invitation. A private card game at a club he knew. One of those places that existed in the margins, where serious men want to handle serious business away from prying eyes. The message came from someone Tony trusted, someone connected, someone who wouldn't waste his time with bullshit. Tony accepted. Why wouldn't he? He was Tony the Bull. He'd faced down unions, cops, prosecutors. Some singer wasn't going to scare him. Besides, the card game was legitimate. He'd checked. Real players, real money, a chance to network, to solidify his position in Vegas. He went alone. That was the first mistake. The invitation had been clear. No crew, no guns. This was professional courtesy. Tony, Arrogant as ever, agreed. The club was in an industrial part of town, down a street with no street lights. The building looked abandoned from the outside. Cracked windows, faded paint, no sign. But inside was different. Expensive furniture, dim lighting, a card table set up in the center of the room, and Dean Martin standing by the far wall. No tuxedo now, just slacks and a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, no smile, no charm, just a man waiting. Tony stopped in the doorway. "What is this?" "Close the door," Dean said. "I'm not." "Close. The door." Something in Dean's voice made Tony obey. The door clicked shut behind him. Locked. No witnesses. No cameras. Just two men in a room that suddenly felt very small. "You owe my wife an apology," Dean said. Tony laughed, nervous, uncertain. "Dean, come on. That was 3 days ago. Water under the bridge, right? I was drunk. I didn't mean..." "You pushed my pregnant wife. It was a mistake." "No," Dean said, taking a step forward. "Spilling a drink is a mistake. Saying the wrong name is a mistake. Putting your hands on a man's pregnant wife? That's a choice. And choices have consequences." Tony's hand moved toward his jacket. Old instinct, reaching for a gun that wasn't there. Dean closed the distance between them in 2 strides. What happened next wasn't a fight. Fights are chaotic, emotional, unpredictable. This was something else. Something methodical. Dean had learned to box growing up. Learned where to hit, how to hit, what breaks and what doesn't. He'd spent years working as muscle before he became a singer. He knew the human body, the way a mechanic knows an engine, where the weak points were, what could be taken apart and how. The first punch shattered Tony's nose. Blood exploded across his face, hot and copper tasting. He staggered back, hands flying up too late. Dean hit him again. Ribs. The sound was wrong. A crack like with splitting. Tony tried to swing back, tried to fight, but Dean moved like he was dancing, like this was choreographed. Dodge, strike, step, dodge, strike, step. Tony's knee buckled with a sound that made something primal in Dean's brain register satisfaction. Tony screamed, collapsing, tried to crawl away. Dean followed. An arm snapped. Compound fracture, bone pushing against skin but not through. Tony was sobbing now, begging, promising money, connections, anything. Dean didn't respond. He just kept working. Shoulder, collarbone, fingers, one at a time, bent back until they broke with small, terrible pops. "Please," Tony gasped. "Please, I'm sorry, Tell her," Dean said, the first words he'd spoken since it started. "Not me. You don't apologize to me. You apologize to her." He broke Tony's other arm, then the other leg. When it was over, when Tony Corso was lying in a broken heap on the floor, every major bone in his body fractured or shattered, still conscious, still breathing, still able to feel everything, Dean knelt down beside him. "You're going to live," Dean said quietly. "That's important. I want you to live. I want you to wake up every day and remember this. Every time you try to stand, every time you try to pick something up, every time you look in the mirror and see what you become, I want you to remember that you did this to yourself. You put your hands on my wife, and this is what that costs." Dean stood up, rolled down his sleeves, and walked out. Tony Corso was found 6 hours later. He survived, but he never walked right again. Never used his hands properly. Spent the rest of his life in pain, dependent on medication, on help, on mercy. Nobody ever pressed charges. Nobody ever asked questions. Tony never told the story, because telling the story meant admitting he'd been destroyed by a singer, and that was a humiliation worse than any injury. The message, word spread, not through newspapers or police reports, through whispers, through the invisible network of connected men who made Las Vegas run. The story changed depending on who told it, but the core remained. Dean Martin had put a mobster in the hospital for touching his wife. The reaction was complicated. Some mobsters were furious. How dare a civilian, an entertainer, lay hands on a made man? Others were quietly impressed. Respect mattered in their world, and Dean had shown the kind of respect for family that they claimed to value, but mostly they were cautious. Because Dean Martin had just demonstrated something terrifying. He didn't care about consequences. He'd risked everything, his career, his life, his family's safety, to make a point. And men like that, men who would burn their own world down for principle, were impossible to control. They couldn't be bought, couldn't be threatened, couldn't be reasoned with. All you could do was avoid crossing them. Dean went back to work, recorded songs, made movies, performed with the Rat Pack. The smile returned, the charm, the easy persona that made everything look effortless. But now, when he walked into a room, things were different. People stepped aside, not out of fear exactly, out of respect, out of the understanding that beneath the performance was something harder than they wanted to test. His wife recovered, gave birth to a healthy baby 3 months later. Dean was there for the delivery, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, being the man she needed him to be. And Tony Corso disappeared from Vegas. Not literally, he was still alive, still out there somewhere, but he was gone from the places that mattered. His crew disbanded. His operations folded. His name became a cautionary tale. This is what happens when you forget where the lines are. Legacy. Years later, people would ask Dean Martin about that night, usually carefully, obliquely, in ways that gave him room to deny or deflect. He never talked about it, not because he was ashamed, not because he regretted it, but because some things didn't need to be explained. Some things spoke for themselves. You protect your family. You defend what matters. And when someone crosses a line, when they threaten the people you love, you don't negotiate. You don't make threats. You don't warn them. You just make sure they understand, with absolute physical certainty, that actions have consequences. Dean Martin spent his career making people laugh, making them swoon, making them believe in romance and charm, and the effortless cool of mid-century America. He was beloved, adored, a legend. But beneath all of that was a truth that Tony Corso learned the hard way. Some lines you don't cross. Some people you don't touch. Some mistakes you don't survive. And when Dean Martin smiled at you from a stage under bright lights, with music playing and an audience laughing, you could smile back, you could applaud, you could love him. But somewhere in the back of your mind, if you knew the story, if you'd heard the whispers, you remembered, that smile was a choice. The charm was a performance. And underneath it all was a man from Steubenville, Ohio, who'd learned long ago that the world only respects one thing: the willingness to break every bone in someone's body to protect what you love. That night in 1959, Tony Corso learned that lesson. Las Vegas never forgot it. And Dean Martin never had to prove it again.